Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a former university professor and a psychological scientist. And today, on this episode, I'd like to talk about how to calculate your social network, its size, its shape, who's in, who's out, or at least who's not quite as closely in, so that we can start examining who are those important people in our lives and are we treating them like they're important to us? Now, by using the term social networks, I'm referring to an old theory that was developed primarily by anthropologist and psychologist Robin Dunbar. He's famous for what's known as Dunbar's number, which is often just put out there at 150. I had the pleasure of working with Robin pretty closely for a few years when I was on the faculty of Oxford University in the School of Anthropology. I got to know Robin a bit and his work, and especially his work on social networks. He's one of the champions of a hypothesis for why humans have big brains. It's called the social brain hypothesis. And in short, it says we've got really big brains to manage our social relationships and to facilitate acquiring information from each other or socially acquire information. But to do that, we have to have these social relationships. And so he's done a lot of work looking at, well, how big are our social networks? And do they have predictable kinds of structures? This work predates these different kinds of social media platforms, and so that are sometimes now called social networks. So there's some confusion over what social networks there means. But in this context, I mean, who are our personal relationships? One way that Robin put it is, who are the people that if you walked into, he's British, so he said, you go into a pub, you happen to see somebody, would it be weird for you to invite yourself to sit down and have a drink with them? Or in a more American context, we might say, you go into a coffee shop and you see somebody. Would it be weird for you to say, hey, why don't I have a coffee with you? People in our personal social network, our personal relationships, it wouldn't be weird at all, right? We wouldn't think it's strange. And in fact, they'd think it was strange probably if you didn't say, come over and maybe sit down and talk for a little while. So who are those people in the network? And by different measures, Robin and his colleagues came up with the answer of there are approximately 150 in the average person's network with huge variations. It goes, down to about 100 and up to about 200, but on average people have about 150. Other researchers have followed up on that and they get slightly different kinds of measures. I'm not concerned with that today. What I'm concerned with is a second analysis that Robin Dunbar and his colleagues did, and that is to look at more of the structure of these social networks. Because it's not that all 150 people in our network are equally close to us. We don't interact with them at the same frequency. We don't feel as chummy with them all. So within that 150, plus or minus about 50, it seems that there are different rings of intimacy. You might think of it like a bullseye or a dartboard, where there's a center bullseye of about 5 people. The next ring out that includes that inner ring of 10 more, so you've got 15. And then the next ring of about 50, again, that includes that inner 15. And then you've got the 150. And outside of the 150, you have acquaintances and, colleagues and people, that you might recognize, but you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable crashing their coffee time or inviting yourself to let them buy you a drink or something like that. Okay? So we've got these concentric circles of rings of intimacy. Interestingly, Robin sees these kinds of rings of intimacy in other social animals. As a very broad working anthropologist, he's looked at all kinds of different social animals in terms of their relationship rings, structures, and network sizes as well. Lots of different kinds of animals. Apes, hooved animals of different sorts. Whales have social structures. Pinnipeds, sea lions, dogs with their packs, wolves. Lots of animals have social networks, and it turns out that they often have these rings of intimacy, and so do humans. Okay, there are people that we invest more time in than others. In humans, roughly, we spend about 40% of our time with roughly 5 people when we're left to our own devices. And then with another 10 people, we spend about 20% of our time. So we spend about 60% of our social time, that is, not our working time, but our social time, with about 15 people. Again, this varies from person to person, but roughly it's 5 people in your tightest group of besties and about 15 people in the next ring out. Now, my team and I, when I was at Fuller Seminary on the faculty in the School of Psychology there, we did a little study inspired by Robin's work looking at the social networks of pastors and other kinds of ministry leaders, missionaries and other folks, especially those who thought of part of their way of doing their job as forming relationships. And we asked them to count out how many people were in their personal social network and then to try to identify those rings of intimacy. And we asked them questions like, how frequently do you or would you spend time with these people in social interaction outside of work? Would you initiate that social interaction? How relationally close do you feel to people? And we'd have them rate that and so forth. And through that process, then we could identify their different rings of social connectedness, of intimacy. And it turns out that these relational pastors often had very distorted relational networks. This ended up yielding a couple of journal articles in the academic kinds of publications, but also I did a piece for Christianity Today that you can look up. We can probably put a link or something somewhere to make it easy to find. But what I'm encouraging you today is to take the time to actually look at your own social network. I'm doing this myself this year, and I'm encouraging you to do it. So here's how. The first thing you could do is try to identify who's that whole social network, that roughly 150 people. A good way to start is the contacts in your phone. If you've got, a smartphone or something like that, or if you're old school and you've got a Rolodex, you can go there. Or maybe it's your Christmas card list. Start with who are sort of all of the people, and then ask yourself, are these people that I really have a personal relationship with? Not just acquaintances, not just sort of those casual people that I know from work or some other thing, but that you would actually initiate social interaction with outside of a work context. Again, you feel comfortable sort of inviting yourself to sit down and have coffee with them maybe. Who are those people? Within those, then you might ask yourself to rate those people on a degree of how relationally close do you feel to them. Say, use a 5-point scale. A 1 being, not really close. A 5 being, oh, we're so tight. We're tight like Sprite. Or whatever is the way you think about these things. Give them a rating on that 5-point scale. And now give them a second rating, which is, if it was up to you, how much time would you spend with this person if you could? Is it an hour a day? Is it an hour a week? Would it be an hour a month? Would it be an hour a year? And between those two measures, what you'll probably find is that there's going to be a subset of these people, a very small one, that you would like to spend time with at least an hour a week, maybe even an hour a day, and you feel very close to relationally or emotionally. That's probably going to be your inner circle, the bullseye of that dartboard. And then there's another group that you'd say, well, I would like to see these people probably at least once a month, maybe once a week, and I'm maybe more like a 4 on that relational closeness scale. That's probably your next ring out, and then you can see how it goes. Those who, yeah, I'd love to see these people maybe monthly, maybe a little less than monthly, but I'm feeling at least a 3, maybe a 4 in sort of relational intimacy. That might be that next ring. And then there's those people I sure want to spend an hour with at least once a year, but I don't feel all that close, but I'm definitely above a 1. Those are probably part of that personal relationship network of the Dunbar's number for you. So that's one exercise you can do. Identify who are those people, and then really looking at those first 2 rings, those roughly 5 people, and then the extra 10 around them to make up that ring of 15. You might ask yourself things like, am I as close to these people as I want to be? Do I want them in these rings? Or do I want them in a more intimate ring? Do I treat them like people who are that important to me socially? You might also ask yourself, are they the right kind of people in there? Are there some kinds of people who are missing? Like if it turns out that your inner circle is all family members, well, maybe you need some friends who are closer than that. There are risks as well as benefits of having just family members in your inner rings. Likewise, there are benefits and sort of costs of having no family members in your inner rings. So you might look at that. Are too many of your people that you just, for one reason or another, can't interact with regularly? So maybe you've moved to a new place and you find, within the last couple of years, and it turns out all of your closest relationships are people who don't live anywhere near you. Well, maybe that's a problem that's worth addressing. Maybe it's time to actually try to cultivate some new local relationships with people that you can meet with and interact with face to face. I think loneliness oftentimes results from imperfect social networks and certain kinds of social anxieties too. And actually, this is one of the things that we found in our study of pastors, is that they often had very broad but very thin social networks with almost no one in their inner circles that they felt really close to, that they had strong degree of trust with. That inner circle of people should be those people that if you've got a problem, you would not feel funny at all turning to. You say, hey, I need to borrow $1,000. And you wouldn't be embarrassed about it because you're that close. Or, hey, you got a spare kidney? I could use one. Or whatever it is. Or, I've got a physical problem and I just need my house cleaned. Could you help me out? Who are those people you have enough trust with and enough relational investment in that you're not embarrassed and it doesn't set up some kind of, okay, you did this for me and now I have to do this for you. If you're in that kind of reciprocal relationship, that's probably not an inner ring type of relationship. So those are some kinds of things to think about when you're looking at that short list of those people in those inner rings. The quality of those relationships. Who are they? How do you feel toward them? Are there enough of the right diversity of people in there that is sort of healthy for you? Are they too tied to your job so that if you lose your job, you might lose all of them? These are questions you might ask yourself. And then finally, you might look at, well, what about just the number of them? Are there too few in those inner circles? Is it time to try to cultivate more intentional relationships? Or does it seem like it's stuffed so full that you just can't manage all of these relationships and really you're stretched too thin socially? Some of us get that way, and then we have certain kinds of social anxieties as well. What you're looking for is probably roughly 5, but plus or minus 1 person in that inner ring. 15 plus or minus maybe 2 or 3 people in the next ring out, and probably any number from, I don't know, 100 to 200 in your total social network. That seemed to be in the normal range of things and the normal proportions. So take a look, try that exercise on yourself, see if it gives you some new insights for identifying who are those people who are really important to you relationally, who are those people you need to invest in this year, and maybe it's time to find some new friends out there as well. I hope this is helpful to you. I found it helpful to me, and some of the pastors that we have worked with and other ministry professionals that we've shared this with have seemed to have found it very helpful for them to consider. So I'm offering it to you in this new year as something that might be a good tool for you as you're looking at your relationships and just who you want to interact with, who you want to invest in. Thanks for joining me here. I'm Justin Barrett. Please like and subscribe. If you have any other questions or topics you'd like to hear me talk about, please let us know. Until then, keep building those social networks.